Hello out there and welcome to Your Next Mission video podcast. Post-traumatic stress disorder, commonly referred to as PTSD, is a condition many in our military and their families struggle with. Our guest today devoted her life to studying PTSD and the underlying effects of reducing the stigma surrounding PTSD and encouraging people to get treatment. When we come back, we're going to explore some of those treatments and how to get help. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Your Next Mission video podcast, where we tell the stories of those who have served in the past and those who are serving today. From transition to financial wellness, VA benefits to mental health, we cover issues facing veterans, active military, and their families. Now here's your host, the 12th Sergeant Major of the Army and co-founder of the American Freedom Foundation, Jack L. Tilley.
Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to all of our veterans and service members and families for the service to our great country. Now, before we get started, I personally want to thank our presenting sponsors, Navy Federal Credit Union, whose members are the mission, and Purdue Global, where you can start your comeback with additional sponsorship from Blue Cross Blue Shield, FEP Dental, Blue Cross Blue Shield, FEP Vision, and USAA. Together, they make your next mission happen. They love our veterans and families. I say it every week. We love them too. Today, we're going to be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and how to recognize the symptoms. And I'm excited to introduce Dr.Sonya B.Norman, Director of PTSD Consultation Program at the VA's National Center for PTSD. She's also a professor at the medical school at the University of California in San Diego. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Sergeant Major Tilley. It's such an honor to be here.
Well, it's my honor to have you, and thank you before we even get started, thank you for what you're doing for all of our veterans, the veteran community. This is so important. This is such an important subject that we need to make sure that we continue to talk about that to help all those people that are struggling out there. Ma'am, before we even get started, could you just tell the audience just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm located in San Diego, California, work with National Center for PTSD, and I've been working with veterans and working with the VA for about 25 years at this point. And I've kind of gone through different roles from leading a clinic for OEF veterans who are returning and had PTSD, to being a training director for other psychologists and social workers and psychiatry residents in training. And I also do quite a bit of research on how to effectively treat PTSD. And I've been with National Center for PTSD for about 10 years.
Well, you only look like you're 18. I can't believe you've been working. Hey,
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, nobody ever gives me that compliment, but go ahead.
You look like you're 18 too.
Oh, okay. I've been waiting for that. Hey, Dr. Norman, let's start with the basic question. What is PTSD?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So PTSD is a mental health condition that some people develop after exposure to a life-threatening traumatic event. So they might have gone through something where they thought they were going to die, or they might have witnessed other people lose their life or have other life-threatening events. And after that kind of experience, some people go on to develop PTSD.
Yeah. To follow up just a little bit, how do you know if you have it? Are there specific symptoms associated with PTSD? I mean, I'll tell you in just a few minutes, but I've had PTSD for probably 50 years. But how do you know?
Yeah, there are some specific symptoms, although there's 4 symptom categories, and within those, people can have a different combination of symptoms. So your PTSD and someone else's PTSD could actually look quite different, but underlying it, there are kind of similar categories of symptoms. So the first one is what we call re-experiencing. It might feel like you're in some way going through the trauma again. It might be having the memories when you don't want them, or having nightmares, or even having a flashback where it feels like you're back in the trauma. So those are some of the symptoms there. Another set of symptoms is avoidance. So even though people are having these reminders, they don't want them. And so people are actively avoiding thinking about the traumatic event, maybe having those feelings, whether it's fear or, whatever they felt at the time, they're trying to push those away. And people start to avoid a lot of actually like people and situations that maybe remind them of the trauma in some way. So someone who used to love going to football games may not want to go anymore because the noise and the crowds now remind them a little bit of those feelings they had during the trauma. And that's one of those things that really limits someone's life when they have PTSD, because that avoidance kind of makes someone's life smaller and smaller because they're not doing more and more things that they used to do or that other people in their community do and feel fine about. Um, Another type of symptom is changes in someone's mood or how they see the world, how they think. So they might feel more guilt, more irritable, more shame. They may have a harder time feeling positive feelings like happiness, love. They may just, feel like the world is more dangerous, or like they're not, ready to handle the dangers of the world. So those are all the kinds of things we look at in treatment. And the last group of symptoms we call hyperarousal, and that's where someone's like keyed up on edge. They might startle when they hear fireworks, is one common example. They might have trouble concentrating or sleeping. A lot of times veterans with PTSD will tell me they'll only sit in the corner of a room so they can scan the whole room and kind of track the environment. So those are all kind of those hyperarousal, I'm ready for danger kind of symptoms. So PTSD is having some of each in those categories. And again, which specific ones people have can look different.
I told you on the prep call, I was overran, 20 wounded and 7 killed. So I've suffered from post-traumatic stress for a lot of years. But everything that you just talked about, I think I went through. Because when I think I told you on the show, I remember I was driving down the road and cars were going by me and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I kept I'm moving, what's going on? And then I realized something. I was only doing 15 miles an hour. Well, but I was back in that mode in Vietnam. I was back, I was on a tank, it was, going 13, 14 miles an hour. That was my job. The other thing is, I struggled with anger issues for quite a few years, and I've said that. Also, crowds bothered me for a long time, and it was hard for me to struggle. And then the real big one, like I said, you touched on a lot of that I went through, is the anger issues that I went through. And I think for me personally, I think because I was in the Army, got out of the Army, and then went back in the Army. Because I went back in the Army, I think I was able to work through a lot of those issues because I guess I was around other people that had the same kind of issues. So, I think for me, and everybody's different, I know that, but for me, I think for some lucky reason, I was able to work through them. Now, do I sort of have flashbacks every once in a while? Things bother me or irritate me, but I'll also tell you that I know when I'm reaching a point where I need to just sort of say, stop. No, this isn't. Back up a little bit. You know what I mean? And so I'm not going to allow myself to sort of lose control. I guess is what I want to try to say.
Yeah, I think you raised, well, a lot of important points, but one I want to highlight is I think, sometimes when people go to treatment, they ask us, will I be the same as I was before I had
Yeah.
PTSD? Will I have no symptoms? And with mental health, we think about it a little bit differently. You might still have times when you're more irritable. You might still have times where you kind of know you need a break, but you know how to manage the symptoms. And the most important thing we're looking for is that they're not interfering with your functioning.
Yeah.
When someone comes to me and they're saying, I'm avoiding everything, so I can't work and I'm barely leaving the house. I'm so irritable that I can barely, get along with my wife, and I have a hard time working with other people. That's interfering with their life. And so when someone tells me, yeah, I still get irritable sometimes, but I know I need a break, I know what to do, or, I'm out here running a very important podcast and doing all these great things in the world, like that's okay. It's okay to still have some effect from the trauma. But as long as you're living a meaningful life, doing the things that matter to you, you're not letting those symptoms interfere. That to me is recovery.
Yeah. The Does the condition always manifest itself right after you experience some kind of trauma? Is that really what happens? I mean, like I said, I was overran, and because of that, I know my life changed. I always tell people I went from 18 to 55. I grew up real quick in war.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it's always a trauma that sets PTSD off, or you get it, I guess.
Yeah, for PTSD, there has to be a trauma. So someone might have a genetic loading to have PTSD or something, but if they never have a life-threatening traumatic event, they can't develop PTSD. I mean, certainly there's some other mental health conditions that have some similar symptoms like anxiety or depression, and anyone can develop those. But PTSD can't happen unless you have that trauma.
Yeah, yeah. One last question. We got to take a break here. Just a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about today. Hey, what's the worst form of PTSD you've ever seen? I mean, there was a lot of bad condition. What is there one worse than anything else, or something more common than anything else? I guess I don't know.
I've seen so many different permeations. I really can't say one is the worst, but I think the thing that's hardest is just when you see it kind of just really breaking people's own hearts because of what they can't do. Like I've had younger veterans tell me, I have this baby and I know I love the baby and I can't feel the love. And that's the
Yeah,
PTSD blocking those positive feelings. And they're so sad because they can't feel that love. Or the person who, barely leaves their house. Or, I mean, I've literally worked with people who have a bunker out in the desert, and their life has just gotten so small because of the avoidance, or they won't leave a single room, so those are some extreme cases. But I would say there isn't a worst. It's really
yeah,
just anyone who comes in, I just want to see them back to having a meaningful life,
yeah.
a life where they're doing the things they want.
I think one last thing. They probably yell at me for not taking a break, but one last thing. I always tell people that when I went to war, my heart turned black. I've seen. I'll never forget this. I've seen a guy one time electrocuted and fell out of a telephone pole, and obviously died. And it was like nobody even noticed. They sort of turned their head and looked and just kept going. It was like it was nothing. And I thought, man, I've really gotten myself in a bad place. I would imagine that you talk to a lot of people the same way. They're not as sensitive as they used to be maybe before they went to war. And I don't know if that'll ever change either. I think that you'll always be a little hard maybe sometimes. I don't know if it's the right word, but a little hard on stuff, and maybe you look at things a little bit differently. I know my grandkids used to tell me I was a no man. Every time they asked me something, I said no, but they knew I meant yes. So go ahead, you was going to say something.
Yeah, it's that's one of the interesting things about PTSD is I think some of the things that make life hard with PTSD are actually very helpful at the time of the trauma.
Yeah,
So when you're at war, you don't want to stop and be feeling, every moment of sadness, every moment of, when it's happening over and over, and your job is to survive and your job is to, do your mission. And so you have to get a little bit numb in those moments to get through them. But then people come to us 20 years later telling us, I still feel numb. I haven't been
yeah,
able to get back to, having that range of feelings I used to have. So that's part of what we look at is what was functional then that kind of your brain, your body adapted that is actually hurting you back in civilian life. And those are the things we try to help people with in treatment.
yeah. Dr. Norman, during this next segment, I want to dig in a little bit deeper into some of the treatment the VA is providing for
Yeah.
our wounded veterans. But first, like always, like everything else, I've been yelling at me. We got to take a quick break, so stay right there. We'll be right back. This is your Next Mission video podcast with me, your host, Jack L. Tilley, 12th Sergeant Major of the Army. If you're enjoying this discussion, I know you are because we're talking about helping our veteran community and helping them with post-traumatic stress. This is important stuff. You hear that, I've got the same thing. So please like us, click on that subscribe button below, and be sure to click on the bell to receive notifications of all of our upcoming video podcast releases. I'll be right back after word from our presenting sponsors.
You're watching Your Next Mission video podcast, proudly presented by Navy Federal Credit Union, the most trusted credit union owned by members of the military community, serving all branches of the armed forces and their families. Their members are the mission. Learn more at NavyFederal.org. And Purdue Global, You're ready for a comeback, and with Purdue Global, you can do more than take classes. You can take charge of your story, of your career, of your life. Earn a degree you can be proud of and get an education employers respect. Start your comeback at purdueglobal.edu. Now back to your host, the 12th Sergeant Major of the Army, Jack L. Tilley.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Sonya B.Norman, Director of the PTSD Consultation Program at the VA's National Center for PTSD. Before we get back to our discussion, I'd like to take a few seconds to tell you about a new program we're excited about called Your Next Mission VCS, a Veterans Community Support Program. We'll provide personalized one-on-one support to address the unique needs within our veteran community, facilitated through our many partnerships with other veteran service organizations. Please check it out at yournextmission.org/VCS and enroll to participate today. Remember, we want to help with you with whatever issues you and your family are facing, so please reach out to us. Dr. Norman, tell us about the different treatments available for our veterans who are really experienced PTSD.
I'd love to talk about that because we do have treatments that are very effective, that help a lot, and people don't always know that that's true. I'll say as a little aside that PTSD is actually one of our newer mental health conditions in our diagnostic manual. It's been in there for about 50 years now, and so and that was really thanks to Vietnam veterans a lot who advocated for that. And that really opened up the door to study treatments. So even if someone saw treatment 30 years ago, they wouldn't have had the same effective treatments available to them that we have now. But in the recent decades, we've put a ton into studying different treatments, and we have a really good idea of what can be effective and what works well now. So I'd love to talk with you about that.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, I was a Vietnam veteran. I came back from Vietnam, and really they didn't do anything for you. You came back, especially at that point in time in our life, we had a lot of people who were drafted, spent a couple of years and got out of the service. So they went, for me, I went basic, AIT, jump schools, straight to Vietnam. And came back and then stayed another year or so and then got out of the service. But you had a lot of people that stayed 18 months, 24 months and got out of the service. And they really released them, and they didn't know what their issues were. And so they just got out of the service. So that's, for me personally, that's why we had so many people at that period of time that were certainly struggling a lot. What kind of timeline can you expect to recovery? I mean, I don't know if you ever recover, but is there a timeline when you can recover? Or when you think you can recover?
I think, so a lot of people right after a trauma will kind of look like they have PTSD. Like if someone's in a car accident or is assaulted, the next few weeks they might be having nightmares, they can't stop thinking about it, they're jumpy. A lot of people kind of naturally recover over those first 3 months. So those symptoms kind of just time does its magic and they get better. And then in some cases, those symptoms continue, and that's when someone's can be diagnosed with PTSD. We also actually, just to mention, we can have a delayed onset. So we've heard from people who kind of are fine right after, and then 5 years later, 20 years later, something happens that reminds them of it and they become symptomatic. So that can happen too. And I think that's important. I want your audience to know that, because sometimes when that happens to someone, the people around them will be like, what are you talking about? That can't be. That was 20 years ago. But that is actually part of the diagnosis. You can have immediate onset or delayed onset. It's not uncommon at all. But for people who do have symptoms, if they don't go down on their own in those first few months, after 3 months, and especially about after 12 months, natural recovery becomes less likely. So recovery is quite possible, but it's more likely with treatment. And so at that point, we really encourage people to get treatment, because some people will get better on their own, but the chances get lower of that the more time passes. And treatments are short. The treatments I'm going to tell you about, they're like 12 sessions. Plus or minus a few, the talk therapies. Traditionally, we've done them once a week, so that's like 3-ish months. But more recently, we've actually been doing them day to day, back to back. So literally someone can finish treatment in a couple of weeks, and they seem to work just as well that way. And people can be just so much better. I mean, in such a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think a lot of people like, I was always apprehensive about telling anybody I had any problems, because in the military, you sort of keep everything to yourself. You're not going to talk about it. And you sort of, when you get out of the service, you do the same thing. Also tell you, as you get older, I think for me personally, as you get older, I think you start thinking about those things that you either seen or done. It maybe starts to bother you. The other thing I'll tell you is that I never went to any therapy. I think I'm not going to talk about it. I tried one time and it didn't work out very good for me. But I never went to any therapy. But because I was around other military people, I think that was my therapy, whether or not they knew it or not. Just the fact that they was telling me about their experiences and my experience, and so we just tell stories, and I think that helped me a great deal, just to work through those issues. Then, of course, not the last person, but the most important person was my wife. I think the fact that she listened. I'm not sure she understood a lot of times, but she listened and tried to give me some advice. In fact, she would tell me sometimes, things I'd do. I'd get mad about it. She's, well, you used to do that. Just so she'd always sort of come back on me. So I don't know. I know from a lot of personal experience that PTSD can, really, for me, disrupt a relationship. Just being able to trust and open up can be, really hard, quite challenging. Would you talk about that? I mean, it's tough to tell people that you got a chink in your armor, so.
Yeah, it's a big irony of PTSD in that exactly what you're describing, getting that social support, whether it's from people you served with or friends in your life now or loved ones, is so important, can be
Mm-hmm.
so healing. And yet the symptoms of PTSD make that really hard to do because you're irritable, you're not trusting people, you're wanting to isolate, you're wanting to just be alone. And so the symptoms are kind of pulling you away from engaging in these relationships in this way that is actually so helpful. So that's another thing we do with treatment is we really try to help people address those trust issues, address those other issues, and really make those connections in their life. It sounds like you were able to do that on your own. But as I mentioned, treatment is a fast track way to help with that and super effective. I'd love to talk with you about some of the specific effective treatments because I really want your audience to know what to look for.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Ma'am, this is your show. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Anything that you think is helpful for our veteran community, please tell us about it. I mean, that's important for us to learn because sometimes people will listen to something and they'll react and, sometimes just let it go. But yeah, anything you want to say, please let us know.
Yeah, so I started talking a little bit about that, that we have specific effective treatments, and it's important to know what to look for because, if you go on the internet and you search, therapists who treat trauma, that's kind of everyone, but it doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
they're doing the treatments, that work necessarily. So the ones that we know from the most kind of studies with veterans, with civilians, with people around the world who all have PTSD, there's kind of a theme of the ones that are the most effective. And those are talk therapies, a specific category called trauma focused therapies. And the reason they're called that is because they really help people kind of process those emotions around the traumatic event that happened and also process maybe how they've changed their lives and how they changed their thinking in ways that are making it difficult for them to recover since the trauma. And so there's 3 different therapies specifically that have the most evidence that seem to be really helpful in reducing symptoms and having people re-engage with their lives again. Um, are you good with me telling you a little bit about each of the
Sure,
3?
absolutely. Go ahead. Sure, go ahead. I
Great.
think that's just
Um,
important.
yeah. So the first is prolonged exposure therapy. I've done a lot of delivering it and actually studying it with various other issues like people who also have addiction and things like that. Personally, it's the one I've studied the most and had done the most work with. But so in prolonged exposure, the idea is that people who've been through trauma really they're not avoiding processing those feelings around the trauma. They're avoiding doing a lot of things that most people in their community would consider safe. Like maybe they don't want to fill up with gas because the smell of gas reminds them of an explosion that was their trauma. Whereas
Oh,
everyone
wow.
else in their community is going through the gas station, no problem, right? So the idea with prolonged exposure therapy is in just a few sessions, it really helps people kind of talk through that trauma memory so that they realize that while it was a horrific event, it's not actually dangerous to talk about the memory now. their PTSD is making it feel as if they're back in the event. But we have them talk through it a few times until they're like, oh, okay, telling the story is not pleasant, but it's not like being in the event. And so they kind of take mastery over it. And then they also start doing those things that in a safe, kind of paced out way that they've been avoiding, that other people would do in their community, but they're not, because of it, the PTSD is sending danger signals. And so that's how that therapy helps people recover. Another one is cognitive processing therapy. And the idea there is that the people who develop PTSD after trauma, they really start kind of an extreme way of looking at the world, and themselves takes over, where things feel very dangerous, or they feel very incapable of sort of keeping themselves, their families safe. And so the therapy goes through a series of exercises to help them kind of come back to a more reasonable place, again, sort of more similar, like maybe they're not driving on the highway because it feels so dangerous, but all their neighbors are. So to help them, again, kind of come back to sort of what's the trauma and PTSD, and what's, reasonable, and things like that. And then the last one is probably the one most of your viewers have heard of, because it's kind of more out there in the community. It's called EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. In this one, people actually kind of track something with their eyes, like go back and forth or do some tapping, and it's supposed to engage the brain and the body. And they do this while thinking about the trauma, and then sort of transitioning their thinking to something more positive. And this also seems to be effective in reducing symptoms. When I say reducing symptoms, what I mean is all those symptoms we talked about earlier, they're not as bothered by, they don't have to sit in the corner of the restaurant anymore. They're not as startled by noises. They're not having nightmares as often. They're able to do more of the things that their family wants them to do that they haven't been doing because of their PTSD. They're not getting as irritable. They're more able to pursue goals in their career, in their life, without sort of that shield of PTSD getting in their way.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you talked about those three processes right there, because it's important for our listeners and our veterans to understand that VA does a great job with helping you if you got issues, and so you're not alone. You're not out there by yourself. And when we come back, I want to talk about how PTSD can lead people to have thoughts of suicide, and how we can help them. I mean, that's a big issue for all of us. So stay with us. We'll be right back. This is a great discussion. Now, here's a word from two more of the organizations that make this show possible.
You're watching Your Next Mission video podcast, brought to you in part by Blue Cross Blue Shield FEP Dental, Blue Cross Blue Shield FEP Vision.
Part of transitioning out is that dental and vision insurance breaks off from your medical insurance.
Vision and dental is very important to be able to enjoy your retirement.
Blue Cross Blue Shield makes the transition so much easier.
And USAA.
A promise is a trust not to be broken, whether spoken with an oath or sealed with a pinky. And after 100 years, we're still taking care of the military community and their families. That's our mission, always.
Now back to your host, the 12th Sergeant Major of the Army, Jack L. Tilley.
Welcome back. We're blessed to be here today with Dr. Sonya B.Norman, Director of PTSD Consultation Program at the VA's National Center for PTSD. Remember, this is your show. It's not my show. We know there's so many issues that directly affect you, and we want to address each and every one of them. So please, as I said before in a lot of the other shows, reach out to me. Tell me what topics you'd like us to cover. You can call or text me at 844-424-1134, or send me an email at smatilley@yournextmission.org. And guess what? I'll reach back out to you. Dr. Norman, is it more likely for people to have thoughts of suicide who have PTSD or versus those who don't? And I gotta tell you something. Like I said, I've had PTSD for a long time. I don't think I've ever had thoughts of suicide. Now I've had thoughts of anger issues and dealing with some stuff real quick and not even thinking about it. But how about suicide? Is that tied together with PTSD?
Yeah, it's not a symptom of PTSD, but it is tied together. It is more common for people with PTSD to have thoughts of suicide than for people without PTSD.
Yeah, yeah. What efforts can we be done to prevent suicide as as it connects to PTSD? What can we do?
Yeah, that's such an important question. What we're seeing in study after study is actually treating the PTSD with those treatments I talked about, and there's some medication options too, is actually good treatment. As people's PTSD symptoms get better, they're also less likely to be thinking about suicide, to be at risk for suicide. So it comes back again to how important it is to treat the PTSD. But suicidal thoughts and behaviors can have a life of their own too. So it's really important, to screen for that. If someone's having those thoughts, to reach out to the crisis line, the veteran crisis line. It's really important for us as those treating veterans and anyone at risk for suicide to be monitoring that, asking questions, assessing, and taking action if someone seems like they're not safe.
I think the other thing is don't be afraid to ask the question.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are just, I don't want to say anything to him because you may upset him. No, ask the question. Are you okay? What's going on? Do you feel uncomfortable? Can I do anything to help you? And the other thing, again, that people are listening, never think that you're by yourself. There's always somebody there that wants to help you. And I think a lot of people that suffer from things like that, from post-traumatic stress, go home, sit on the couch and just think. Get out, be involved, get out in your community, talk to people, listen to people, and be honest about how you feel. If somebody doesn't like it, don't even bother. I talk to people all the time, probably don't like what I'm saying, but I just keep talking. I don't care because it's therapy for me, and they probably don't know that. So, Doctor, do you think having the family involved when somebody is seeking treatment for PTSD is important? I think it is. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we generally leave it up to the person seeking help, right? I'm not going to force them to invite their family or invite the family behind their backs or anything like that. But it's something we talk about with people, whether they want their families involved and the level of involvement. Sometimes that means the family comes in once just to hear about what we're going to be doing in treatment, to learn about PTSD, to learn about how they can support their loved ones. But we actually have treatments where a loved one comes in every single session, and it's kind of a couples treatment for one person's PTSD. So there's a lot of options for how involved the family can be, and we can work with someone to do what's right for them.
Yeah, I think I may have said this on the prep call. I know I've said it a lot here lately, but I think we should put some kind of educational process within our military that talk about how are you going to react to war. Talk about PTSD and TBI, because got to be honest with you, people. I'm not saying you ignore it, but you always say it's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to have those issues. I can see whatever on the battlefield. It's not going to bother me. And I think for a little bit older people like I am now, probably that's true. But you got to understand that most people go to war 18 to 24. Those are the ones that are on the ground. They're fighting. They're easily affected by the effects of war. And so I think we got to figure out a better system, because it seems to me now we're doing a lot of good things. VA, a lot of people are doing a lot of good things. But why don't we start at the beginning? Why don't we start when we first go into the military, start talking about if you go to war, here's some things that could happen. If you react to these things, because if you look back, and I don't know if I got the number right, but there's quite a few people incarcerated in our country that are veterans, I'm sure, suffering from some kind of post-traumatic stress, all sorts of, and homelessness, and of course we already talked about suicide, but we need to do something, but we need to do it up front. Instead of waiting to sort of, put a Band-Aid on. Let's do it up front, talk about it up front, be very open about what those issues are. If that's my own personal feeling, I don't know if everybody agrees, but I think it's important to do that. If somebody wants to reach out to you, first of all, you're outstanding. I love just talking to you every time I have the chance. If somebody wants to reach out to you, if somebody what's the best way to get a hold of you? What are some of the tools they can access to get help?
Yeah, no, that's great. I would just go to the VA website, VA, www.va.gov. It's the portal to everything. So much of what we've been talking about, you can find treatment locators. You can find ways to access your local VA. You can find information about the crisis line if you're in crisis. And there's just a ton of information about the things we've been talking about. So we were just talking about families. There are literally pages and pages. The National Center for PTSD website is within the general VA website. There are pages and pages of what a loved one should know about PTSD, how a loved one can support someone for PTSD, how a loved one can take care of themselves, because it can be a lot of stress to be with someone with PTSD, how a loved one can help their person with PTSD decide to get help. All of that, there's great information about. So it's a great place to start. And so many resources and tools like apps and websites that really help manage symptoms, that help learn about treatments. We can do a whole show on those, but I'm happy to talk about any specific ones or answer any questions.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for coming on the show. And again, thank you for what you're doing. Is there anything maybe we missed that you want to reemphasize before we jump off the show? Is there anything else you want to say or,
I just really want to convey a message of hope, especially, for Vietnam era veterans who maybe developed PTSD at a time when we didn't have so many great treatments available and maybe feel like there's no hope. I just want to say we have good treatments. They're available at the VA. People can feel better. People can feel like life is meaningful. Relationships are good. Give it a chance.
Yeah, well, golly. Well, thank you for what you're doing, and don't. I know you're never going to stop, but keep doing what you're doing because you're making a difference to a lot of people that
Thank you. You
that
too.
certainly appreciate it. So God bless you, and thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Thanks again to Director of the VA's National Center for PTSD, Dr.Sonya B.Norman, for being with us today. She did a tremendous job, and she's a person that has a big heart that wants to do all she can to help that veteran community. I'm Jack Tilley, 12th Sergeant Major of the Army, and you've been enjoying Your Next Mission video podcast. And thank you for joining us. Log on to our website at yournextmission.org and leave me a review. I don't know why we put that up, but if it's a good review, put it on there. If it's a bad one, keep it to yourself. No, you can put anything on you want. But while you're there, you can visit our nonprofit and corporate partners who have jobs and services available that can assist you in your transition from the military. And check out our job board with partnership with Recruit Military, where you can search for a job that's just right for you. Please go to the website to watch a short video that will help you fine-tune your search and where you can create your own personal profile. You can also follow me on all my personal social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Rumble. And if you like what we're doing on Your Next Mission, please click on that subscribe button below, and don't forget to click on the bell to receive notifications about all of our upcoming video podcasts. Don't forget, we want to hear from you. Please leave me a message or send me a text at 844-424-1134 or send me an email at smatilley@yournextmission.org. Thanks again to Dr. Norman for joining us today. And we talked about a subject today that is so near and dear to my heart. We talked about post-traumatic stress. And you heard here's a guy that, I stayed in the Army a long time. I never talked about post-traumatic stress, but I had it probably I've had it for over 50 years. But while I was in the military, I probably had it for 32 years or maybe 34 years. You're not alone. You're not by yourself. People want to help. Don't do what I did. I kept it to myself and I worked through my issues. And I struggled. I struggled a lot. Never think that you're alone. And never be afraid to go talk to somebody. Never be afraid to say, hey, I need help. I need somebody to listen. You see, I did that for so long. Don't you make the same mistake that I did. Talk to people. Reach out for help. You're not alone. Thanks for watching. And thanks to New Mind Studios and, of course, our sponsors, Navy Federal Credit Union, Purdue Global, Blue Cross Blue Shield, FEP Dental, Blue Cross Blue Shield, FEP Vision, and USAA. We appreciate all you do for our military. And as always, see you on the high ground. Hooah!
You've been listening to Your Next Mission, brought to you by the American Freedom Foundation. Learn more by visiting yournextmission.org.